Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Mike from MOBOXgraphics.com, and in this video tutorial, I'm just going to show you how to do this kind of animated icon. So you might see this something on like Twitter or Facebook or whatever. You can kind of favorite with a star, or maybe you've seen it as a heart, and it's heavily based on the Twitter favorite icon. So I will have some reference documents here. I did create this once before just to kind of see if I could figure out how to do it, and I obviously was able to, but I might need to come in here to just kind of take a look at some of the keyframes, because getting this look does require quite a bit of keyframing. So I'll just be bouncing in between that and this sparkle comp. So I will be creating it all custom, but I just want to let you know that I might be bouncing to those. So I guess let's start by creating a star. So if you come up here and hold down the left click on this, on the circle, you can come down and there's actually a star tool. If you click and you press the arrow keys, you could actually add more pieces of the star. So yours might be a triangle at first, but you just make it a 5-sided. And then you just hold shift and it will let you kind of scale it proportionally. So centering up the anchor point, holding Y on the keyboard, or pressing Y on the keyboard, and then aligning it to the center using the align tool. If you don't have that, go to Windows, Align, and you could just simply grab it and move it to wherever you want it to be. So I like when it's over here. So this star, let's give it a little bit more character. It's kind of rigid. What's great is that you could actually open up this, which I'll rename to star. What's great about this is you could open up the polystar settings and you can change the amount of points from here. You can change the inner and outer radius as well as the roundness. So what we want is we want an outer radius a little bit larger, or an inner radius a little bit larger. And we want to kind of add a little bit of rounding to this, just to give it a little bit more character. So that already has more character, maybe the inner radius, maybe a little bit more. And that already looks a lot better. So I guess from here, I'm gonna just duplicate this layer, Control D. I'm gonna rename this to Star Outline. And I'm gonna rename this to Star Fill. I could probably do this all in one shape, but I just think it's a little bit easier when it's separate like that. And I'm going to add some motion blur to this. And now we're ready to go. So for the star outline, I'm obviously gonna make the fill 0. And on the star fill, I'm gonna make the strokes nothing. So let's see, for this outline, let's see, I'm gonna make the outline maybe 2, maybe a little bit more. 8.3 looks great. I'm just gonna hide that layer real quick just so I can get a better look at this. So that looks good, and I'm going to make it white. And I'm gonna make a dark background. So layer, new, solid. I'm gonna make a nice dark background. You can make yours on a white background. It's up to you really. But I'm just gonna lock that layer so I don't accidentally drag it around. So, okay, so we have our fill and we have our outline. It's pretty great. Now what we wanna do is create a new null layer, layer new null object. And this I'm gonna rename to controller. And I'm going to parent both of these to that controller. So what I want this to do is I want this to scale down. So start at 100, scale down a little bit, and then I want it to scale up just past 100%, so it's kind of having a little bit of a bounce to it. Maybe come down to 98, and then 101, and then 100. So let's see what that looks like. So it kind of has a little bit of a bounce. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open this up in the graph editor. I'm just gonna select all these and go easy ease. And now I can start messing with these. So let me just look at my reference here just to see kind of what I did. So taking a look, this is kind of the graph that I created. It looks like junk, but so let's see. What I like is for these to kind of look really smooth, so I don't want it to kind of be like a hard edge. I'm not sure how much that matters, but I don't know, I think it works for me, so. And then these can kind of be a little bit softer. Just take a look at that. So that already looks pretty good, nice and smooth, but it's a little slow. So I'm just gonna select all these, holding Alt on the keyboard. I'm just gonna drag this down. So I want this to happen in maybe not quite a second. I like the speed here, but I think that this goes too fast. So I'm just gonna just highlight these, holding Alt and drag that out a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. That's good spacing. So when this comes down, I'm actually gonna make this fill. So now I'm gonna see the fill. I'm just gonna open this up here. I'm gonna right click and go to mask. Actually, I'm not gonna mask it. What I'm gonna do instead is I'm actually gonna change the radiuses here. So the inner and outer radius, I'm gonna set keyframes. So at this point, it should be max, right? Because it's bouncing as big as possible. And down here, these are gonna be 0. And since I stretch these, there's actually no point where this keyframe is, so I'm just gonna move it to the nearest point so I can line all these keyframes up. And then for these, I'm gonna open up the graph editor. And I want these to kind of be really fast. Just like that. But I don't quite want them to be at the same time. So let's see what happens if I kind of drag this out a little bit. Whoa, that looks crazy. I don't know if I like that. Let me just kind of Control Z this and bring us back to something, back to reality. So let's see. Take a look at what that looks like. So I don't really like, it right here. So let's see. I think we may have went a little bit too spaced out on those keyframes. So that looks good. Take a look. So I want this actual outline to end. So I'm going to hit Alt, right bracket. And so we kind of get that, but it is, it is rough. So let's go ahead and add kind of a circle splash around that. So just coming back here, I'm just going to create a ellipse, holding Alt, or holding Shift again, I'm sorry. Holding Shift. I'm now going to center this up. So this is a Motion 2 script. If you watch my videos, I'm sure you're sick of me saying that, but this you can get at mountmograph.com. The link will be down at the bottom of the description. It's like $30, but that's how I use to center up my anchor points. So what you'll notice here is that this star actually isn't centered in the comp. And the reason is because the geometry of the star, it just isn't right. The way After Effects centers up, it's not based on mass, or based on center of area. It's based on just center of the geometric shape. So I'm going to use this controller here to just make sure this is centered in the circle. So the circle is perfectly centered, but the star wasn't. So I'm going to rename this to circle. Add the motion blur. I should probably spell circle correct. And I'm going to again right click mask, new mask. I'm going to hit M on the keyboard to see my mask, make it inverted, but change the shape to ellipse. So yours might be set to rectangle. Come down and set it to ellipse. And let's see, expansion. Here's the problem. I don't want a stroke, but I do want a fill. And yellow's fine. I'm just gonna bring the transparency down a little bit. Hit M on the keyboard to pull up my mask again. So what I want is I want the keyframe here. for mask expansion, and I want a scale keyframe, so I'm going to hit S on the keyboard and hit scale, press U on the keyboard, and let's see, so my scale I want to be at 100, but I want my mask to be completely gone. Hitting J on the keyboard, bouncing back to this keyframe, I want scale to be 0. So now we kind of have something that looks like that. And if we kind of stagger these a little bit, you kind of get a cool look. And I'm just going to change the graph on these keyframes, but I'm going to use my tool here. I'll show you what that looks like. That's what the keyframe should look like in the graph editor. So let's see what that looks like. So that looks pretty cool. And I actually think all of this is happening too fast now, so I'm just going to hold Alt and drag it out a little bit. And then I'm going to just need to move that there, and I'm actually going to move these over just to line up all the keyframes. So let's compare that to our reference, just to kind of see where we're at. Okay, so what I think I want to do is maybe keep this outline around a little bit longer. Kind of like that. That probably looks a little bit better. And that does. What else I think I'm going to do is I'm actually going to increase the scale here on this circle, so it's a little bit larger, kind of like that. Maybe even extend this out a little bit. Just like that, and now we just need our sparkles. So the sparkles should be the easy part, but actually it's not the easy part, it's actually the harder part. Especially if you don't know expression. So let's just go ahead and kind of mess with some of these sparkles. So I'm just going to start by creating some circles. And I'm going to center up the anchor point, pressing Y on the keyboard, moving it to the center. And I'm actually going to drag this to the center of the composition. I'm going to just change the color so it stands out. That will not be the final color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make, this is kind of how I guess, let me see. This is how I like to kind of get a straight line. I don't know if this is necessary, but this is what I like to do. I like to make it a 3D layer, rotate it in the Z direction, and then move it. So now I know it's going to be moving, why can't I grab it? So now I know it's going to be moving exactly through that axis, as opposed to if I were to move it by hand, it wouldn't necessarily be through the exact center. So I like to do this. It's not really necessary, but I'm going to rename this to Sparkle 1. Make sure it's got motion blur. Remove the circle underneath. Maybe attach the circle to the controller as well. Just so it's done. And let's see. So at this point, this is when I want the sparkle to appear. So I'm gonna hit S on the keyboard, P on the keyboard, U on the keyboard. So I'm just gonna drag these keyframes over, and I'm gonna set the scale to 0. And actually I want my position keyframe to be there, but out here, this to be out. The scale's a little large. And I'm going to add some smoothing again. This is what your graph should look like. I'm using my tool. And I think that's a little fast, so I'm just going to drag these keyframes out. And now T on the keyboard. Set a transparency keyframe, U on the keyboard again to pull up all your keyframes and bring this transparency down to 0. So let's see what that looks like. Again, I think it's extremely fast, so I'm just gonna, again, drag these out. but it's obviously happening way too fast or way too soon. So that looks about right. And now I'm just going to duplicate this layer, Control D, hit U on the keyboard again. And so now I have 2 sparkles. And I am going to delete the secondary position keyframe, move this sparkle over, come to this point, drag this out, but also a little bit to the right. In fact, these again, since I stretched them out holding Alt, they're not exactly on a keyframe. I'm gonna bring this one in a little bit and this one in just a tad. And make this one a little bit smaller. So now we have something that kind of looks like this. That's obviously way too slow now. Just make sure these all have the same graphs. That looks better. See, what happened was I just hit Control Z, by the way. I'll show you kind of what happened. So these graphs, since I made new keyframes, it didn't hold the same smoothing as it did before. So what I did was I just selected all of these and added the same smoothing again using the tool, but you could just drag the little Bezier path handles. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to take this Sparkle 2 and I'm going to move the keyframes over by a couple frames just so it's staggered, kind of like that. So that looks pretty good already. And now I'm just going to pre-comp these. Both of these, Control Shift C. I'm going to name this Sparkle Comp. Hit Enter, which looks cool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make sure that this is continually rasterize, which means that I can zoom in and it will maintain its quality. Now double clicking these, I'm going to add something to give them a little bit more of an edge. This is exactly what Twitter does, and I really like this aspect. So they kind of change colors, which gives it like kind of a sparkle. So I'm going to search for color balance, HLS, and drag it onto, actually what I could do is I could just go layer, new, adjustment layer, and drag this on top of the adjustment layer. I'm holding Alt and pressing Q. That allows me to add an expression here. I'm going to use an expression I found online from a user named Darby Adelin from creativecow.net. I use this website all the time, but here is his expression that he created to give you kind of, it allows it to change color over time. So basically it says this is how many frames. So every 5 frames change colors. So this is the frame rate. So it's this comp, the frame duration. So how many frames there are times 5. And then so this will evaluate everything after this line at X frames. So evaluate this random color generator every 5 frames, or every time this comp divided by the number of frames times 5. So it's kind of a little complicated, but if you mess with these numbers, you should be able to understand it. So I'm just going to copy that whole expression in, Control Shift C, I can paste it right in, but I'm going to change this frame duration. I want it to be kind of every maybe 10 frames. And actually I'm going to make it every 20 frames because my initial one was a 30 frames per second comp, and this is a 60 frame per second comp. So I'll likely need double the frames. So you can kind of see there that it's changing the colors of these over time. When we jump back here. Oh, okay, so I need to actually move this under the star, because since this is continually rasterize, it's adding that on top of everything, because this again has the adjustment layer, which actually kind of looks cool, but that's not what we're looking for. We want something kind of like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit T on the keyboard, bring the transparency down a little bit, because we don't want it to be fully visible like that. And I'm just going to duplicate this layer like maybe 5 times. And I'm going to kind of rotate these around Obviously want them to maintain being on screen. And let's see. One of these needs to be, which one are you? I think, whichever one this one is. Why can't I grab that one? There you are. What I'm probably going to need to do is grab all these, parent them to the controller. Parent them to the controller. But what did I just do? Oh, for some reason I jumped to the... That's strange. I'm just going to hit Control Z a few times. That was very strange. I don't know how I wound up in reference 1 comp, but yeah, so I'm going to marry all these to the controller, but I'm also going to create a new null object because again, this controller has scale properties and I want this to scale without messing up my keyframes. So I'm just going to parent it to a new null and scale this down. But what I'm going to do for these is I'm actually going to maybe every other one, I'm going to just select and go to layer transform, and I'm going to go flip horizontal. I'm going to need to obviously re-rotate these into position, but basically what that did was it actually rotated them on an axis, so now they look a little bit more random. Now what's weird is that they kind of go gray. Let's see what's going on. I think that green looks a little gray on this background. But let's see. I guess next up what I would do is I would stagger these out just a little bit, maybe by 2 frames. And see what this looks like. I think that looks... Now one thing I don't like is I don't like how these sparkles are bouncing with the null. So I'm just going to actually marry these not to the controller but to the null 3 itself. Just like that. And I think this is going just a little bit slow. So just selecting all these keyframes, bring this in just a little bit. And I'm going to need to do the same here to these. And I'm just going to guess to see how much I need to bring these in. I'm a little curious why they start out gray. It might be due to the transparency, which it is. So what I'll probably do is just mess with these sparkles here and start the opacity less. Start at maybe 80. See what that looks like. Bring these over. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to not continually rasterize these layers because the hue is affecting them, and I kind of like when there's a little bit more of a continuous color here. But let's see. I like this, but I don't like what the color that it's starting at. So let's see if we can't change this a little bit. Let's change this to maybe 375 and see what color we get. Jump up to 600, see if what that does. So an interesting thing I could do is I could even do a slider control to this. I could set this to slider control. And then I could change this and allow myself to kind of see which colors I'm going to have. So in the beginning, maybe I want kind of a purple. A little bit more of a blue. That looks cool. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's not quite as smooth as my initial one, but if I had more time, I would go through and make all these keyframes absolutely perfect, just like I did my initial one. But anyways, that's just a quick look at how I made this kind of icon animation. Let me know in the comments down below if you want to see more videos like this. And if you did enjoy it, then please give it a like. But give me suggestions in the comments down below. I'd be happy to check them out and maybe do them in future videos. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching.